When Diddy got arrested by the Department of Homeland Security after a flood of progressively worse and worse lawsuits and accusations for almost a year straight, no one was surprised. If Diddy had ever been one thing, it was creepy. You didn't have to look very hard or even look at all to see that something was wrong in Diddy's mind. Inappropriate relationships with teenage Justin Bieber and Usher, the rumors around the mysterious deaths of Biggie and Tupac, an easily recognizable thirst for attention, and even worse things that I literally can't say in the first 5 minutes of a YouTube video. Basically, people had already known for years that Diddy wasn't the generous, conscientious music executive that he and his team tried so hard to make him look like.
So I had two choices. Either I was gonna sit in that failure and give up, or I was gonna make a decision to step out of the darkness. You see, when you're in that darkness, you wanna sit there and wait for the light to come. The only way out is to step forward, to face your fears, to become your own light.
Behind the big donations to schools, the activism, there was always an undertone of evil that even $1 billion fortune couldn't cover up. You don't get your name associated with murder and stealing for no reason.
I'm a savage. Whatever I want, I'm going to get. Whatever I want, I have to get.
But it wasn't until his arrest and the ripping off of the mask that Diddy's true nature was finally revealed. He wasn't a good guy with a dark side or a nuanced figure with a complex past. At the exact moment when the federal government brought him in for sex trafficking charges, it was confirmed that Diddy was truly deeply evil. The evidence was right there. It was the final piece of the puzzle revealing that Diddy had spent his entire life taking advantage of others to the point where his music empire was nothing but a front for his sick obsessions.
And he knows better than to be talking about the things that he does with Big Brother Puff on national television.
At the same time though, Diddy's arrest somehow created a lot more questions than it answered. We all knew he was a bad guy, don't get me wrong, but now we're realizing that it went so much deeper, with Diddy starting to look like his sick, disturbing crimes might rival those of Jeffrey Epstein or Harvey Weinstein. Not just one bad actor, but instead the leader of a criminal operation carrying out revolting abuse and exploitation. And so now, there are even more questions than there were before. How did Diddy get away with it for so long? What were the full extent of his crimes? But even more sinister, who knew about his empire of abuse and didn't tell? Who, out of his massive network of celebrity friends and powerful contacts, was joining in? The size and scope of Diddy's alleged crimes combined with his control over the industry implies a much larger web of deception and evil than most of us could have ever imagined before. Not monsters in the shadows, but instead evil, despicable people standing in the spotlight. But most of all, how is a person like this created? Who is Diddy, and how did he end up as one of the most evil public figures in modern history? On a dark, freezing night in January of 1972, a man named Melvin Combs, a 33-year-old retired military veteran from New York City, sat silently in his parked car. He was parked along Central Park West, a wide avenue in Manhattan that separates the greenery and peaceful quiet of Central Park from the gorgeous, affluent Upper West Side. At least, that's what it is today. But New York in 1972 was a very different place. The local economy was struggling, unemployment was higher than ever, and people and businesses were leaving the area as quickly as they could. New York at the time was dirty, dark, and falling apart. Melvin Combs himself lived in Harlem, where a widespread increase in arson, violent crime, and drug use had turned Harlem, a previously vibrant neighborhood, into a grim, shadowy underworld. Melvin returned from his service in the military at a time when benefits for veterans were practically non-existent, and living in Harlem, it was very difficult for him to make ends meet without dealing drugs. But he was good at that. Eventually, he even formed ties with Frank Lucas, the infamous New York drug lord whose life was later turned into a Hollywood movie. But on that night, as Melvin sat in the car, engine running in the cold darkness, a figure came out of the shadows and shot him dead. His killer was never found. Most murderers weren't in those days. Most people figured it wasn't a random accident. When Melvin had been arrested for trafficking drugs 2 years earlier, several of his associates had been raided and imprisoned shortly after. It led to a rumor that he had become an informant in exchange for immunity, because he was never arrested again. Essentially, it was entirely possible that there was a bounty on his head for selling his own people up the river, although nothing was ever proven for sure. Either way, what Melvin left behind on the day he died wasn't just a life of crime or a drug trafficking empire. He was a dedicated family man, married to a part-time model and a teacher named Janice, and together they had 2 young kids, a 1-year-old girl named Keisha and a 3-year-old son named Sean, both of whom would now be forced to live without the strong, grounding influence of a father in their life. After losing her husband, Janice Combs realized how much more difficult it would be to raise her kids in a healthy, caring way without a father, especially for their son Sean. She cared a lot about making sure that Sean didn't end up going down the same path as his dad, becoming a drug dealer, living the street life, or even worse. Doing whatever she could to protect him. For starters, she wouldn't tell him what happened to his father. Throughout his childhood, she told Sean that his dad was killed in a car accident, a cover-up that he wouldn't discover the truth behind for almost 2 decades. She then took on the massive financial burden to move them out of New York City. They went to the neighboring city of Mount Vernon, which, while not a lot safer or nicer than the dirty underworld of New York that had taken her husband's life, it was at least sort of a fresh start. Being a widow raising 2 kids by herself, Janice had to work 3 jobs at the same time to pay the bills, and they were still in poverty. A lot of the time she was so busy that she had no choice but to send the kids to stay with her sister, who lived in the Patterson housing projects in the South Bronx, in the same type of environment she fought so hard to get them out of to begin with. And it was there that a young Sean Combs experienced what he would say later became the exact source of his lifelong ambition. Being a kid in the South Bronx during the late 70s was not ideal. At the time, the South Bronx was widely considered one of the most underprivileged places in the US, with conditions so bad that even the president visited to draw attention to the struggles New Yorkers were facing. Diddy said this:
"One day we woke up and there were 15 roaches on my face, and I was like, I'm not gonna do that. I'm gonna get out of here. I'm gonna be somebody. I'm gonna own something and be able to take care of my family. I don't want to live in these conditions anymore."
And while that particular quote turned into more of a meme than anything, with Diddy only telling it once he had become a billionaire many years later, it's not unbelievable considering what the Bronx was really like at the time. He also said this:
"It just kind of snapped on me. Don't take less in life and always fight back. To this day, whenever I get too comfortable, I remember the roaches. I remember living in a situation where babies weren't changed for 2 or 3 days and everything smelled and there was no food. That memory is what really fuels me to make sure that one day none of us have to live like that."
Luckily for Sean Combs, as he grew up in the gritty, decaying streets of New York, the biggest deciding factor in the direction of his life was his mom's dedication to raising him right. Janice Combs raised her kids Catholic, getting them involved in the local community and putting them on the track towards education and discipline, making sure that Sean stayed away from the choices and lifestyle that killed his dad. They regularly went to church, and Sean even worked as an altar boy when he was a kid. Janice was even able to get Sean into a private school, Mount St. Michael Academy, an all-boys Catholic institution in Mount Vernon with numerous educational awards to its name. But despite her best intentions to protect her son from the evils of the drug trafficking and gang violence that killed her husband, there was an entirely different type of evil lurking beneath the surface at Sean's school, the very same place his mother had sent him so he would be safe. Because in 1988, just 1 year after Diddy graduated from Mount St. Michael Academy, the principal and chaplain of the school were both indicted for sexual abuse. In a case prepared by the NYPD and the FBI, they determined that at least 3 14-year-old boys had been molested. Timothy Brady, the school's principal, was sentenced to prison, although he was never removed from his position in the Catholic Brotherhood that operated the school. And despite the overwhelming evidence against the school officials, with charges being brought by the literal FBI, only one student was willing to speak out publicly, and so no trial was ever held. The principal, Timothy Brady, later moved to Chicago and worked at a different Catholic school for boys over there. While there isn't a directly known link between the traumatic predatory events at Mount St. Michael Academy and Sean Combs himself, sexual abuse by Catholic priests is a known, widespread issue that casts a long shadow over the reputation of the church, even though studies and information are limited, with many Catholic brotherhoods refusing to grant transparency to outsiders. But we know from extensive research that there's a cycle of sexual abuse, positive correlation between being a victim and later becoming a perpetrator. In many ways, our childhoods shape our adulthoods, and with Diddy attending a school that was later found to have abusers at the top of its leadership and being an altar boy for many years, the monstrous evil choices and behaviors that later defined his life could be a hint at a dark, unresolved trauma from his past. With countless stories coming out later about Diddy forcing young boys to undress in front of him, admitting to sleeping in bed with Usher, having a bizarre relationship with Justin Bieber, lawsuits that allege he sexually forced himself on men as a form of domination, there are even videos of him being physically intimate with Biggie Smalls. Not to mention the fact that people have been talking about this in radio interviews and podcasts for years. That behavior isn't Diddy being gay. That's a guy doing what he knows, repeating what was done to him. That type of behavior most often doesn't come out of nowhere. As soon as he finished high school, the Combs family was overjoyed when Sean was accepted into Howard University as a business major. But still, being at university was never his top priority. And during his first year at Howard, he leveraged connections from back home to secure an unpaid internship at Uptown Records, a New York-based record label that at the time was one of the fastest growing in all of R&B and hip-hop. Around this time, Diddy, then going by the name Puffy, gained a reputation as a fiercely ambitious industry player willing to do whatever it took to advance his career. He had a natural talent for networking, and many of his opportunities arose from his ability to forge connections with influential people easily. His internship at Uptown Records, for instance, came through a friendship with a New York rapper he met at a party that he hosted as a teenager. He started commuting between Howard University in DC and Uptown Records in New York so he could pursue both opportunities at the same time. He was tasked with helping develop the label's newly signed artists like Jodeci, Father MC, and Mary J. Blige. As an intern, his main responsibilities would be things like driving Mary J. Blige from her apartment to recording sessions in Manhattan or organizing events for artists on the label, but it was quickly discovered that he had far more useful talents than running a guest list or driving an artist to the studio. The company quickly realized that he had such an ear for production, trend-making, curation, and relationships that he became an essential part of their operations practically overnight. Because the first record that Diddy ever produced ended up being a massive hit, but he wasn't even meant to be the producer. Originally intended to be produced by a professional, the producer never showed up to the studio, so Diddy sat down and made the record himself. That record ended up selling 2 million copies. And so within a year of working at Uptown, the label's founder Andre Harrell promoted Diddy to Director of Talent, one of the highest positions in the company, despite the fact he was barely 21 years old. Diddy wasn't just ambitious, he had the skills to prove what that ambition was worth, and he was quickly becoming very, very powerful. Even back when he was making a name for himself as an influential young tastemaker in R&B and hip-hop, producing a long list of hit songs for artists like Jodeci, Mary J. Blige, and more, there was a strange darkness starting to surround Diddy's career. On December 28, 1991, Diddy and Uptown Records artist Heavy D, at the time one of the top rappers in New York, were set to co-host a charity basketball game in the City College of New York Gymnasium, a small venue with a capacity for about 2,700 people. As a crowd gathered in the lobby, some people rushed down the stairs and through a set of swinging doors, thinking they would be able to get into the event that way, not realizing that the stairs didn't lead to the main event, but instead a utility stairwell. Over 3,000 people rushed forward without a clue, creating a crowd crush that would kill 9 people at the front of the crowd in under 15 minutes. The 9 people killed by the City College Stampede were high school and college students, all between the ages of 15 and 26. They were all from the surrounding neighborhoods. And while crowd crush events can be impossible to predict and control, and most of the time the fault lies with the security team, Diddy's reputation still took a hit, with many media outlets directly blaming him for the death of almost 10 kids. After all, the event had his name on it. Diddy even later claimed that he contemplated taking his own life after the accident, saying that he lost his mind from the pain and trauma. He stated publicly that he had been left alone in the gym with all the bodies, trying to resuscitate people to no avail.
I knew I would have to explain what was going on and what happened. I was there with 9 bodies on the ground. Nobody else was there. No police, nobody. Just me and 9 bodies.
In his words, it ruined his life.
It was too much for me to handle. After the incident, it was like I was crazy, losing my mind, thinking about the people who died, thinking about the families, thinking about their pain. For a while, I was probably clinically insane.
In reality, though, the other side of the story didn't quite go the same way. The real victims were the people who lost their kids, brothers, sisters, and friends. And those who later spoke out all pointed out that their own personal lives were over forever. They had no fame, wealth, or clout waiting for them on the other side, just the trauma of losing family members they could never replace. One person whose older brother was killed at the event said this in 2024.
I believe in karma. He never really owned up to anything, and he never told us he was sorry. Whatever's going on with him now, I guess it was meant to be. But me, I lost everything that day. I lost my big brother, my best friend. He walked right past me after there was this big rush into the gym. He was with Devontae Adams from Jodeci, and he didn't seem concerned about what was going on. I never got the sense of remorse or accountability. Just, let me get my stuff and get out.
But somehow, this story doesn't just end with callous indifference to people's lives. The concert had originally been organized as an AIDS outreach education event, and a portion of the ticket sales was to be donated to charity. Once all the dust settled from the tragedy though, the money was nowhere to be found, and there had possibly never been any money set aside to begin with. A criminal investigation later discovered that while the majority of the blame for the disaster should fall on City College for failing to realize the potential for a huge crowd, some blame still fell on Diddy himself, which resulted in several lawsuits settled out of court in the years to follow. But what most of all revealed Diddy's true character was a 1998 civil case that was brought against him by two of the victims' relatives. During that case, a New York City judge named Louis Benza ruled that Diddy was lying about his attempts to save people in the gym, and it only questioned his credibility even further. After the events of the City College stampede, Diddy seemed a lot more like a sociopathic narcissist than a guy who was in the wrong place at the wrong time during a tragedy. It wasn't necessarily his fault that the accident had happened, but the way he acted afterwards, trying to take credit for things he didn't do, trying to paint himself as a victim when all he had done was separate himself from the real situation. At best, it made him look like a narcissistic scumbag, but at worst, it revealed an evil lurking underneath his charismatic personality. Because even in the early 90s, Diddy was already known for being a party animal unlike any other. But it wasn't just a vice, it was also one of his greatest assets. Once he was working at Uptown Records, he became notorious for parties that he called Daddy's House, attracting over 1,000 guests every week, from college students to local kids to celebrities, rappers, and athletes. He was becoming more than just an A&R, but instead a strangely alluring, larger-than-life figure in the industry. Because these parties weren't just about having fun. They were strategic networking events where Diddy could spot new talent, make connections, and build his reputation. However, they also had a darker side with reports of excessive drug use, underage drinking, and questionable behavior even early on. And maybe the most conspicuous example of Diddy's character at the time was when a 14-year-old usher came to live with him for a year. In 1991, the same year as the deadly stampede, a then 14-year-old usher who just recently signed a record deal was sent by his label to live with a then 25-year-old Diddy in New York. From a business perspective, it made sense. Diddy was a powerful tastemaker with experience and connections. From the biography of Diddy by Susan Trout,
Combs groomed stars in an intensely hands-on style. He reinvented their images by helping shape their music and choose their clothes. For better or worse, Combs sought to control every aspect of an artist's look, sound, and actions. He was taking on more and more responsibility because his ambitious nature made him crave more.
So maybe Usher was a kid with lots of potential and Diddy wanted to help him grow, but from a personal perspective, that wasn't quite as clear. Why in the world would a 14-year-old boy be sent to live with a 25-year-old man he didn't know? Especially someone like Diddy, who was known for being a crazy party animal. L.A. Reid, the label exec who sent Usher to live with Diddy, said this:
Usher was 14 years old, but nothing about him ever seemed juvenile. I was turning him over to the wildest party guy in the country at an age when I still needed his mother's permission, but he went to New York for almost a year. I didn't know whether I was being irresponsible or having an epiphany.
Usher later went on to become a massive R&B star, in many ways with his career being pushed forward by people like Diddy. But it wouldn't be until many years later that he expressed more candid thoughts about the time he spent in Diddy's care. During a 2016 interview on The Howard Stern Show, he gave some candid thoughts on what it was like. Although he was noticeably cagey and pretty uncomfortable looking, he did share a few details, and as it turns out, L.A. Reid wasn't having an epiphany. He was, in fact, sending a literal child into a den of snakes.
Now, that was L.A. Reid's idea, right? We're sending you over to something called Puffy Flavor Camp.
There you go. Hey, it was curious. I got a chance to see some things.
Yeah, but you were 13. What were you seeing?
I went there to see the lifestyle.
Right.
And I saw it. And it was, but I don't know if I could indulge and understand what I was even looking at. It was pretty wild.
So nobody tried to, some woman didn't come along.
I didn't say that.
Okay.
I didn't say that. What I did say is that there were very curious things taking place. Uh-huh. And I didn't necessarily understand.
Now, would you ever send your kid to Puffy Camp?
Hell no.
See?
You can literally see and hear Usher's discomfort when talking about this. We might not know what happened between them exactly, but it's not hard to interpret how he feels about it. The look on his face during this interview is genuinely haunting. Even Diddy himself later went on to reveal some pretty concerning details about the 14-year-old kid living in his house, basically saying that he even had Usher sleeping in his bed.
My brother right here from day one, we used to wake up and, pause, but like, check this out. I mean, back in the days when he was like 10 and I was a little bit older, his older brother, we used to fight over the Frosted Flakes. You know what I'm saying? Before pause was invented. But it's my brother for real. We used to actually wrestle off of the Frosted Flakes because he used to always get up early. Now he's one of the richest stars in the world. And
what the fuck did Puff just
While neither
say?
Diddy nor Usher ever acknowledged specific details about their relationship, predatory or not, the fact that a 25-year-old man was given custody of a 14-year-old boy at all is deeply troubling, and again, it reveals a lot about Diddy's character and priorities. Elsewhere in the city, a 20-year-old named Christopher Wallace was also raised by a single mother and sent to Catholic school out of his mother's desire to keep him safe in the dangerous streets of New York. Christopher, though, went down a much different path than Diddy. Despite his strict moral upbringing, he started selling drugs when he was only 12 years old, hiding his drug money on the roof of his apartment building so his mom wouldn't discover it. But by the age of 17, after dropping out of high school, he had been arrested for drug dealing multiple times, including once spending 9 months in a jail in North Carolina because he was caught selling crack cocaine. By 1992, at 20 years old, he was facing up to 15 years in prison. But even though their lives couldn't be more different, Diddy and Christopher crossed paths anyway in a way that would change both of their lives forever. Because in 1993, Diddy discovered Christopher's music by accident while going through demo tapes at Uptown. Christopher, going by the rap name Biggie Smalls, was still in and out of jail and dealing drugs at the same time as he was trying to make music. He had no experience in the industry, just demo tapes that he reluctantly made at the insistence of a producer friend. The story goes, though, that Diddy was completely convinced he had found the next big thing. And so when he finally tracked him down and convinced him to sign to Uptown, one of the greatest and darkest eras in hip-hop history was about to begin. But at the same time, Diddy was still going through even more issues. After only 3 years of working at Uptown Records, he was unceremoniously fired from his high-ranking position just a few months after signing Biggie. His mentor at Uptown was later quoted as saying that he fired Diddy so he could go on and found his own venture and live up to his own potential, not being an employee anymore. On the surface, the reason was pretty simple. Diddy really believed in Biggie Smalls, but the rest of the label didn't. Uptown was known for fun music, and Biggie wasn't that. His music was dark with themes of drug use and violence, and it was full of depressive reflections on his fucked up life. It was morbid stuff that just didn't work with the Uptown vibe. Despite the originality and the quality of his songs, the label tried to get him to change his tone, but ultimately, that wasn't the right move either. And so Diddy took Biggie and left Uptown forever. Later giving this kind of questionable explanation for his departure, he said,
"I was very passionate and I didn't understand protocol or workplace politics, so I got fired because there can't be two kings in one castle."
And that explanation implies kind of a different reason for leaving that wouldn't be explained for many years to come. Because while he did go on to find more success with his own ventures, at the same time he left a strange trail of evidence behind him at Uptown Records. Years later, a woman named Pam Lewis Rudden, who worked as Diddy's assistant at Uptown, gave an account of what it was like to work with him during his time at the label. She said this:
"He called me a bitch one too many times."
She described a pattern of constant berating and humiliation that got to be enough where she eventually left the company entirely. But it wasn't even just that.
She said, "It wasn't like you would be alone in a room with him and he would say it to you one-on-one. It would be in front of the whole office and all of the artists."
And while Diddy being an abusive coworker at his first job might just be a footnote in the long list of things he's done, it shows exactly what kind of person he was early on. Disrespectful and self-centered, with no regard for the people around him. The early years of Diddy's career paint him as a businessman with a golden touch. The results of his work were glamorous. He had an unreal ability for artist development, curating sounds, strategizing promotion, and whatever else was needed to make records sell millions. Even more than that, though, he was charismatic. In a way that's rare for behind-the-scenes industry figures, Diddy himself became a celebrity. Even when he was in his early 20s, he was hosting parties that attracted countless music industry figures and created insanely lucrative connections. He was becoming an industry rock star, using his ear for music to launch himself into stardom, without making any music of his own. Especially when he was first getting started, his production style was pretty limited and simple, and a lot of critics seemed to be of the opinion that he wasn't very talented, relying too much on samples to be considered a great producer. But it didn't matter. He was a master at the art of getting attention. Simply put, he was good enough at his job that most people he came across were fine to look past what lurked underneath the surface. A cutthroat, vicious, possibly even manic desire for fame, power, and money. From his lies about the city college stampede that killed 9 people, to the mysterious disappearance of the charity money, the way he exposed Usher to inappropriate, possibly even traumatizing experiences at the age of 14, being impossible to work with at Uptown to the point of getting fired, and even abusing his employees at the label, in any sane world, one of those things would be enough to end someone's career. But Diddy was different. He was in a position where he was too important to be turned down. His connections, his talent for spotting artists, his ability to generate massive profits for the industry, it made him untouchable. The majority of people he came across weren't going to turn him down. Even if he was exploiting or mistreating them, he had too much power to ignore. One of Diddy's most bizarre and sinister tactics early on was his strategy of inserting himself into every aspect of his artist's royalties. At Uptown, he not only used the artists he managed to boost his own image, but also involved himself in the creative process. By contributing a lyric, singing background vocals, or helping with production, he was securing royalties from multiple sources on one song. This meant that while he was helping the label rake in millions from sales, he was also personally profiting every time, often at the expense of the actual people making the music. And his approach ensured that he'd benefit financially from every angle, maximizing his earnings while potentially diminishing those of the actual clients themselves. It was clear from the early years of his career that Diddy would do anything and everything to make sure he was climbing as high as he could in the music industry, while getting paid as much as humanly possible. And as his influence grew, so did his immunity to consequences. The music industry, driven by the promise of hit records and financial success, was willing to overlook his true character, setting a dangerous precedent that would shape his career for years to come. But what came next pushed Diddy far over the edge, taking him from being an ambitious young figure in the business to being one of the biggest music executives of his generation, and possibly one of the most exploitative and evil figures the music industry ever saw. Biggie Smalls changed hip-hop history forever, and he had Diddy at his right hand the whole time. When Diddy left Uptown, largely because the label didn't embrace Biggie's music, he brought Biggie with him. When they finally got his debut album Ready to Die out to the public, it was a massive hit in every way. And within a year of his career getting started, he became one of the biggest rappers alive. Ready to Die was a hit with fans and critics. Beyond just selling extremely well, going gold less than 2 months after it dropped, critics gave it perfect reviews. People were calling it a smooth, dark, scary, and realistic autobiography of a drug dealer. At the time, it was nominated for Grammys, and even 25 years later, it's still considered one of the best rap albums ever made. And Biggie became a rap star overnight. The 1995 Rapper of the Year at the Billboard Music Awards, the new King of New York. He was getting love from critics and listeners. He was a guy who could win Grammys, do collaborations with Michael Jackson, and be a hard-hitting street rapper. And making a debut album that's an instant classic, that doesn't happen very often. Biggie was quickly becoming one of the most loved, most iconic rappers alive, and Diddy, his manager, producer, and the person who helped develop his persona, was right up there with him the whole time. They were an inseparable part of each other's career and brands. But they burned out just as quickly as they got started. And in the wake of their complex relationship, the question persists. Was Diddy truly Biggie's mentor and right-hand man, or the predator who ultimately caused his tragic downfall? The mystery remains unsolved to this day. Because late one night in March of 1997, while Biggie was on a trip to Los Angeles to promote his second album, Life After Death, he was murdered in cold blood while his car sat at a red light on Wilshire Boulevard. Everybody was shocked, but at the same time, somehow they weren't. Because Biggie and Diddy's insane rise to fame came with its own set of complications. In the mid-90s, the East Coast-West Coast hip-hop rivalry was intensifying quickly, and Biggie found himself at the center of it after the mysterious death of Tupac Shakur just a few months earlier. He was in a precarious position, being one of the most prominent figures in the rivalry. A lot of people felt that Tupac's death might have been related. Meanwhile, Diddy's aggressive business tactics and growing influence in the industry were also raising eyebrows. His partnership with Biggie, while incredibly successful, was also becoming increasingly complex and fraught with tension. As Biggie continued to rise, questions began to surface about the true nature of his relationship with Diddy, given the extent of Diddy's control over his career and finances. You see, Biggie gave Diddy a lot of credit for his career. Diddy wasn't just his agent. In a way, he had made his career possible. Biggie had been facing jail time before signing to Diddy, and then even after signing his record deal, he almost lost it all when the label didn't want him anymore. And Diddy brought him back from all of that. But even deeper, there are multiple videos where you can see Biggie being bizarrely physically intimate with Diddy in a way that looks like a lot more than brotherly love. It was known that Diddy owned 50% of the publishing rights for all of the artists on his label. It was also known through people that worked with both of them that Biggie was becoming unhappy with the split he was getting. A photographer that worked with Bad Boy at the time was interviewed by Rolling Stone and said this:
Biggie was absolutely about to leave Diddy. I know for a fact because he told me that. Everybody wanted to leave Diddy. Everybody eventually leaves him.
And that article went even further to describe a shocking lack of empathy from Diddy when he lost his closest collaborator and the star artist on his label. It says,
when Biggie Smalls was shot and killed in March of 1997, Sean Combs reportedly took the situation and capitalized on the shock and sorrow. He denied the leave request of LaJoyce Brookshire, Bad Boy's publicity director who was traveling with Biggie the day before his death. Instead of letting her process her grief, he gave her the job of ensuring that Biggie's posthumous album Life After Death went #1 upon its release.
And it didn't stop there. It got to the point where even Suge Knight, Tupac's former manager and a convicted killer, was disappointed by Diddy's heartlessness.
A few months after the killing, Bad Boy was approached by Rolling Stone for a cover opportunity, one that Bad Boy co-founder and then president Kirk Burroughs suggested should go to Biggie. But Diddy said, no, he's dead. I'm putting out my own debut album, No Way Out, and I need to be on the cover of Rolling Stone. And ultimately, Diddy landed the cover of the August 1997 Rolling Stone issue. But that unsavory move was looked down upon by even Death Row Records' Suge Knight, who's known for his violent temper and is currently in jail for a manslaughter sentence. He said, when Tupac passed, I didn't pick up a microphone. I picked up the pieces.
And while it's been difficult, if not impossible, to prove definitively, many people have argued over the years that Diddy had the motive, means, and opportunity to be responsible for killing Biggie. While Diddy had helped develop Biggie's career and mold his success, ultimately Biggie didn't need him. On the flip side though, Diddy needed Biggie. Without talent on his roster, he had no business. And so this dynamic led to intense speculation about his involvement in Biggie's murder. Multiple industry insiders have suggested that when Diddy caught wind of Biggie's potential departure for better deals elsewhere, he was willing to take drastic measures to maintain control. Eminem is just one person who's publicly accused Diddy of killing Biggie and Tupac for years, and even Tupac's family has said that they don't think Diddy was 100% honest about his connection to the killings. It's something that, while impossible to prove, kind of makes sense when viewed in the context of the rest of Diddy's career. The idea of him realizing that Biggie wanted to leave him and rather having him dead than making money for someone else isn't that hard to believe. But theories aside, the fact that people find it believable at all is emblematic of the legacy Diddy was already beginning to create for himself after just a few short years in the industry. He had discovered and built up an artist with great potential, literally one of the greatest rappers of all time, but he seemingly failed to safeguard that talent. And when his supposed close friend and top client was brutally gunned down, Diddy's actions were more focused on self-glorification and protecting his own interests and profit than on honoring Biggie's legacy. And ultimately, one of hip-hop's greatest voices ever was silenced at the age of 24, robbing the world of his artistic potential, while Diddy didn't really seem to care much at all. Shortly after the death of Biggie, Diddy embarked on a music career of his own. The guy who had spent years behind the scenes was now going to pick up a mic. And just 4 months after Biggie passed, he released his first album, No Way Out. It did debut at #1 on the Billboard charts, selling 500,000 units in a week, but it was monumentally bad. Despite having all the connections in the world to get features from Jay-Z, Lil Kim, Busta Rhymes, Maze, and even 4 posthumous verses from Biggie's archives, No Way Out still managed to be an absolutely horrible album. The only songs that charted at all were the ones featuring Biggie. No one wanted to hear Diddy's rapping. And now on Spotify, 27 years later, the song featuring other artists have 50, 60, or 70 million plays. But the ones with Diddy alone, less than 1 million each. While Diddy had presented the album as a kind of heartbroken inner reflection after the death of his close friend, saying that the violence took a toll on him and left him traumatized, it didn't quite come off that way in reality when he started making music just a few months later. And looking at reviews of the album online, it's pretty easy to figure out how most people feel about Diddy's rapping career.
Puff Daddy was occasionally a great producer with the Notorious B.I.G., but as a solo artist, yikes. Or he just isn't an interesting enough MC and nobody is buying his tales of shooting his rivals. Biggie or Black Rob or someone else obviously wrote this for him, but they would have been better served to keep it for themselves.
One person wrote,
Puff Daddy's first album was excellent, but only when Puff Daddy isn't on the track.
Or,
okay, this album is just a total piece of shit. It does have 3 great songs like Victory, Young G's, and All About the Benjamins, but what these 3 tracks all have in common is that they feature Biggie. It shows that without Biggie, Puffy ain't worth shit. His rapping is really, really awful. He's one of the worst rappers ever and has absolutely no skills, no flow, no emotion, and nothing to make him special.
I think my favorite review says,
"Let's get this out of the way. Puff Daddy is not a good MC, even when he's rapping lyrics written by someone else. He sounds like a chump on the mic, but luckily he has a golden ear and is surrounded by talented musicians who make even his shittiest raps sound expensive and cinematic." He also surrounds himself with some of the best MCs of the time, Biggie Smalls, Jadakiss, Busta Rhymes, and he allows them to do a lot of the heavy lifting. This was a mega smash album, but revisiting it, one might be surprised at how much of a downer it is.
And finally,
Diddy couldn't write his name, let alone a song.
No Way Out was bad enough that a lot of people said Diddy's popularity at the time signified the end of the golden age of rap. He was bad enough that his presence brought down the entire genre. Even worse, not only were his albums laughably corny and lame, it was an open secret that none of the material he ever rapped was actually his. Diddy almost exclusively used ghostwriters. It wasn't even worth trying to hide that someone like Diddy, a rich and powerful manager, agent, and executive, would be incapable of writing authentic lyrics. He went to private school, got a corporate job at 20 years old, and made millions off of other artists' catalogs before he ever recorded a song. No one was ever going to see Diddy as a real rapper. The list of rappers who've been confirmed to write for Diddy over the years is long, from artists on his label like Biggie and Maze to 50 Cent, Drake, J. Cole, Jadakiss, Jay-Z, Nas. Diddy spent years and probably millions of dollars buying raps from some of the greatest artists of his generation. But he was never one of them. Even from the start of his recording career, he was exploiting the people around him so he could have his own moment of fame, ultimately playing the entrepreneur rather than actually making art. In total, Diddy made 5 albums. While almost all of them debuted at #1 on the Billboard charts, each one of them was worse than the last, carried only by features and production, with Diddy himself somehow failing to create any music of any value across a 7+ year recording career. His albums are similar in format to what DJ Khaled does, but instead of playing the part of a goofy side character, Diddy made the mistake of actually shoving himself in everyone's face as if he had done anything at all, when ultimately he hadn't. Even with multiple #1 albums to his name, he didn't create anything worth remembering, and Diddy's rap career has been almost entirely forgotten, overshadowed by his greedy business practices and later on, the monstrously evil actions in his personal life. And so, Diddy's brief stint pretending he could rap became emblematic of his whole philosophy: selfish, narcissistic exploitation. His so-called solo albums, written and performed mostly by better artists, exist in the same spirit as him giving himself royalties off the artists on the label he worked at. This pattern of exploitation and self-promotion defined his trajectory in the music industry and beyond. Despite how bad these albums really were, they only continued to make him more and more money. And his ability to market himself and capitalize on the talents of other people, even when his own abilities fell short, would become the hallmark of his entire career. Another shocking and disturbing moment in the history of Diddy's career was his relationship with Jamal Barrow, who rapped under the name Shine. Shine had moved to New York City from his home country of Belize as a kid, and he quickly fell in love with hip-hop. Within a few years of freestyling around town, getting better and better while he worked as a bicycle messenger in Manhattan, his talent was noticed by a local producer. In 1998, at the age of 20, he was introduced to Diddy, who signed him to Bad Boy Records on the spot, giving him $2 million, 3 cars, and a house in exchange for a 5-album deal. Shine getting signed to Bad Boy caused a media shockwave. He became a star overnight, going from sleeping on his mom's couch in Brooklyn to living in Beverly Hills in literally a matter of weeks. But he would only be able to enjoy that newfound success for a short time, until Diddy would literally destroy his life. After about a year in the limelight, doing features for other Bad Boy rappers, being called the next Biggie Smalls, playing shows, and working on his debut record, it all came crashing down on December 27, 1999. Shine was with Diddy at a club in Times Square when another patron started an argument with him and at the same time pulled out a gun and threatened to kill Shine. The story goes that Diddy, Diddy's bodyguard, and Shine all drew guns, and that Shine himself shot his gun 3 times in the packed club. And while no one was killed, 3 people were seriously injured. Shine, Diddy, and Diddy's bodyguard were promptly all charged with crimes. But when the trial began, Diddy confusingly hired a different lawyer for himself and his bodyguard than for the 20-year-old artist he had just signed to his label for millions of dollars. Shine himself insisted that he hadn't shot anyone at all, only fired into the air and not towards any bystanders. When a ballistics expert came to the witness stand and revealed that the injuries at the site were caused by a .40 caliber weapon, not the 9mm like Shine had on him, it only got even more confusing. There were even witnesses, victims of the shooting, that said they directly saw Diddy was the person who shot them. One person said,
I saw Mr. Combs pull out a black gun with his right hand, and I literally watched them pull out the guns. I had a clear point of view. For God's sake, I got shot in my nose. I watched everything occur and have described it vehemently to all parties involved.
Diddy, meanwhile, testified that he didn't even have a gun on him that night. And eventually, after a 7-week trial, his lawyer got him and his bodyguard acquitted on all counts. But Shine wasn't so lucky. After the trial, he was convicted by a jury of reckless endangerment, assault, and possession of an illegal weapon. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison without eligibility for parole, and he served 9 years in a maximum security facility in upstate New York. After a decade in prison, he returned to his home country and became a high-ranking politician in the House of Representatives, working to strengthen the justice and education systems in Belize, and he's currently running to be Belize's next prime minister. Speaking on Diddy in 2024, he said this: "On Thursday, Shine forgave Combs and moved on.
He acknowledged that he was trying to see if Combs would invest some money in Belize and the country's education system.
But he also said,
Let us not forget what the cold, hard facts are. This is someone who destroyed my life."
More than anything, the story of Shine's rap career confirms that Diddy only ever saw the artists on his label as resources to make money off of. Over and over again, the young people he signed and was supposed to protect and help and mentor were nothing but a source of income that he could throw away if he needed to. Instead of protecting Shine, a 20-year-old kid who came from another country to chase his dreams, he called witnesses to testify against him and hired a different lawyer to protect him. Shine's mother wrote this:
Puffy has the same responsibility as a teacher or a coach. Shine was out with his idol on that fateful night. When I put my child in your hands, I don't expect him to end up dead or in jail.
And ultimately, Diddy's treatment of Shine reveals who he really is, a morally bankrupt person. By abandoning a young artist who he had a business relationship with and who looked up to him and who he was supposed to mentor and protect, he showed a callous disregard for the people around him. He would rather hang Shine out to dry than give up on his own pursuit for power and wealth. And even though this incident is often overlooked and forgotten, it exemplifies the pattern of exploitation that defines Diddy's career. The fact that this betrayal is now just a footnote in his history, it says a lot about the extent of just how evil he was. It's a tangible reminder of the human suffering that's often behind his empire. His willingness to sacrifice other people, even people who were under his guidance, it underscores an evil that was a constant in his rise to fame and fortune. By the time the late 2000s rolled around, Diddy's music career had started to fizzle out, and his second, third, and fourth albums were genuinely horrible. Trying to replace a total lack of creativity with paid features can only get you so far, and eventually, he just moved on to other things. Around the same time, Bad Boy Records also started flopping. A lot of its top artists became inactive for one reason or another. From Maze retiring from music and leaving the label to go pursue Christianity after just 2 albums, to Shine's prison sentence, to a lack of posthumous material from Biggie, to the horrible failure of Diddy's own albums, by the year 2000, Bad Boy wasn't even able to generate enough revenue to pay back the $50 million advance they were given by their parent company. Essentially, Diddy's career as a music executive didn't go all that great. Most of the artists he worked with didn't stick around him for long. For one reason or another, they all left. Even the ones he didn't get killed or sent to jail. He had already become one of the most powerful people in music, mostly from taking a cut of so many different artists' catalogs that he had amassed more wealth than any one person he ever worked with, probably more than all of them combined. When it was still doing well, Bad Boy Records was worth over $100 million. He had built up some of the biggest rappers of his generation, but still, he couldn't keep it afloat. Because while Diddy was good with people, a natural-born celebrity, host, master of networking, deep down, he really wasn't. Past a certain point, almost everyone who was signed with him just left. Even Black Rob, whose career was one of Bad Boy's few success stories after 2000, eventually flopped under Diddy's leadership and went to prison and died homeless on the streets of New York many years later. His career and life just one more example of Diddy sucking the value out of an artist and then leaving them for dead. You see, sociopathic and psychopathic personalities are often associated with success. A lack of self-awareness and empathy can make you really ambitious in business and entrepreneurship and other fields, and Diddy himself is the perfect example. A shiny, luxurious exterior, but a personality that made him impossible to work with. And so as the years went on, once a powerhouse worth over $100 million, his record label ended up faltering under his leadership. Artists and employees had to distance themselves or have their lives ruined due to his selfish, incompetent leadership. Meanwhile, he's keeping up appearances of being a big, important, influential player in the music industry, mainly by prioritizing his own profit over anyone else's well-being. The contrast and tension between Diddy's charismatic public persona and his behind-the-scenes mismanagement ultimately contributed to Bad Boy Records' fatal decline. And it also exposed his inability to build long-term personal relationships that are crucial for real success in the music industry. And leeching publishing rights off his artists. He built his own nationally known $100 million record label, but almost every single artist he ever signed either turned their back on him, ended up in jail, or even died. The label eventually ended up pretty much defunct. His clothing and fragrance lines seemed to have high valuation, but they made little to no impact in the world of fashion, and they're now pretty much forgotten. He made multiple albums, but literally never wrote his own verses and received horrible reviews from critics. And he was open about using ghostwriters, pretty much naming himself as the least authentic rapper in the industry. In a world of Kanye Wests and Jay-Z's, hip-hop moguls whose music, designs, and cultural impact is tangible and remembered and understood, Diddy was always a bit flat. No one remembers his music, his clothes weren't memorable, and even his own artists didn't stick around to do business with him. Diddy's success was ultimately hollow. Despite his lifelong, desperate attempts to make himself into something, he was at the end of the day still nothing. The only lasting legacy of the 30 years he was in the public eye before being arrested was that he was an honestly strange, intimidating, weird person. In my mind, the lack of depth that defines his career is just one more piece of evidence for the monster hiding under the mask. It shows that he never really cared at all. It was a quest for power and control over his colleagues, his rivals, his clients. It was all about ego, pride, and narcissism. And while he did do some horrible things in that context, leaving behind $1 billion trail of exploitation, the true, terrible evil was still hidden all along. Until now, when it's finally been revealed. If you let Diddy tell the story of his own life, he's a hero. He spent massive amounts of resources and time throughout his career creating good optics for himself. Even as recently as 2021, one of the last magazine profiles that was ever done on him before his arrest tells us a lot about how Diddy wanted people to see him and what he thinks of himself. During that 2021 interview with Vanity Fair called With Love, Sean Combs, he talked about his new lifelong purpose that was literally sent to him by God. He says this,
"I feel like God sent me. God put on my heart, what's your purpose? I was looking at all these things, preachers and different people talking about purpose, because I realized purpose is something deep. Have I really found my purpose? I know I'm making money and I'm successful and I'm changing the game, but is that my purpose? And then I really prayed on it, and God told me, your purpose is to play a part in saving the black race."
The man who spent his whole career signing his fellow black artists into record deals designed to make him rich off their work, the guy who lied on the names of almost a dozen black kids from his own hometown dying at a concert he was performing at, saying he had tried to save their lives and then leaving the scene immediately, the same guy who testified against Shine and let him go to prison for 10 years, ruining his life and career rather than tell the truth, the guy who grew with teenage Usher. The list is endless, and that's not even to mention the long-running rumors that he ordered the death of Biggie Smalls, his business partner and supposed best friend. That's the guy who's saying he is supposed to save the black race. The hypocrisy and self-awareness is almost unbelievable. Meanwhile, Diddy still says a lot of other highly suspect stuff in this article. At the time, he was embarking on a strange vanity project where he rebranded himself with the name Love, talking about progress and equality in a way that was pretty meaningless back then, but now is just disturbing knowing what he was getting away with behind the scenes. He said,
"The Me Too movement inspired me. It showed me that you can get maximum change." The journalist wrote, "He launched a diversity training program this summer. The 6-week course is dubbed, in true Sean Combs fashion, the Excellence Program, and is designed to support aspiring entertainment executives from underrepresented communities."
But then, most ridiculously of all, he said,
"I was sent here not to just do things that are rooted in personal success, but to be able to transfer to we, and do things that are a real change, bringing communal success to everybody."
As if he had ever done anything to anyone except traumatize, abuse, and exploit. Even before it all came out, though, people called Diddy out for his hypocrisy. Knowing that his history in business was anything but loving, it's pretty ridiculous to hear him tell people that he wants to save the black race. But now, knowing what we know today, the interview with Vanity Fair and many others he did at the time show how deep-rooted Diddy's evil is. The whole time he's preaching about how he's gonna save his race, benefit his community, give back to people, he was not only already exposed for doing dirty business against black people his whole career, but he was also abusing his black women behind the scenes. Even as recently as just a few months before Cassie's bombshell lawsuit was filed against him, destroying Diddy's image forever, he received a Global Icon Award for the Video Music Awards, and then, shortly after, was given the key to New York City by Eric Adams. And he went to great lengths to curate this good image. For many people, Diddy was this guy who opened schools, founded charities, and represented success against all odds, true black excellence. But even that was a facade. In 2016, he founded a charter school in Harlem, New York, making a big deal out of the PR and congratulating himself for being so charitable, promising better opportunities for underprivileged kids growing up in a similar situation as him. Although, later, parents of students at the school reported that it was mismanaged and underfunded, being plagued by high teacher turnover and student violence. But with Diddy, the way that he continued to seek out this attention and curate this image of an inspirational, generous, caring black billionaire, it reveals a lot about him. Any sane person who exploited his colleagues, putting them in bad deals, leaving people for dead, testifying against his clients, and was even rumored to have put a hit out on his supposed best friend, not to mention grooming kids, most people, if optics were looking that bad, would go into hiding. But with Diddy, his lack of self-awareness, his narcissism, it made him keep coming back for more attention, and ultimately I think him still blowing his own trumpet while public opinion started to shift played a big hand in his eventual downfall. The motivational speeches, the PR campaigns, the videos of the yachts on the Amalfi Coast, if he didn't spend so much money and time flaunting, the story around him right now might not even be half as big. Because still, the world always knew. And now that he's sitting in a federal jail awaiting a trial that sees him facing a sentence of anywhere from 15 years to life, despite his best efforts to create a narrative that he controls, it just never really worked in his favor. I mean, let's look at the ridiculous stuff that he had written about himself in his biography.
Sean Combs was only 2 years old when he realized his life's passion. His mother had dressed him up for a fashion show at his daycare center, and as the little boy toddled out, the light hit him and the audience cooed at his adorable entrance. Combs later said, "As soon as the spotlight hit me, I embraced it." He says, "I came out and tried to steal the show," and what he accomplished with cuteness at 2 has repeated over the years with hard work and determination. Enormously talented and regularly controversial, Sean Combs has created an empire in film, fashion, and fragrance, changing the face of hip-hop forever. At age 2, Combs knew what he wanted from life, and since that first spotlight, he's been stealing the show ever since.
This type of ridiculous narrative shows just how dumb Diddy is. Despite his success and money, he couldn't manage to keep a low profile enough to get away with his insane crimes against humanity. And rumors about Diddy's true nature had been circulating for decades. The joke that you had to have sex with Diddy if you wanted a record deal in the rap game was an old reliable punchline, to the point where I doubt most people saying it even knew what they were referencing. But it always seemed like it really might not be a joke, with even big figures in music like Eminem, 50 Cent, Cat Williams, and Kanye speaking publicly on their dislike for Diddy. Not to mention that even without the rumors, Diddy's business career was shady at best, with the fact of him exploiting his artists being public knowledge. Not just a rumor, but something literally everyone knew. The fact that he seemed to love fame and attention so much, always on a talk show, always doing some interview, or popping up to receive an award, it made him seem even more sinister. Being a shady businessman is one thing, but most people do that in private. Trying to draw as much attention to yourself as possible, as if you're congratulating yourself for getting away with it, it's safe to say that Diddy didn't exactly have fans. Instead, he had power and influence, and he was able to leverage that into as much attention as possible. And I think most people could tell the difference. Now, with Diddy suddenly sitting in federal jail facing 15 years to life, the secret is out. He was much, much worse than just a shady or unethical businessman. In reality, his exploitative business tactics were a cover-up for something much, much worse. All of those rumors were true, and more. And if you're trying to see what was going on behind the scenes all along, one of the first places you need to look is the women in his life. One of the biggest sources of clues throughout Diddy's life and career was his romantic relationships. And that makes sense. The long list of women he's been connected to are some of the people he spent the most time with. They should know him best. So when it comes out that he's been hiding his true character all along, that's where people are gonna look first. Diddy had a relationship with the model Kim Porter from 1994 to 2007, later dated singer Cassie Ventura from 2007 to 2018, and has also been romantically linked to Jennifer Lopez, Cameron Diaz, Young Miami, and many others. These women could play a key part in revealing the extent of Diddy's crimes, potentially providing a unique insight into what really happened behind closed doors, at least the ones who are still alive. Kim Porter might be the most notable woman in Diddy's life. She met Diddy while working as a receptionist at Uptown Records, his first record label, and they were together on and off for almost 15 years, having 3 kids. Diddy even adopted her first son, Quincy. Kim herself was a successful actress, appearing in a number of roles as well as modeling on numerous magazine covers. She also helped start singer Janelle Monáe's career while running a lifestyle planning company in Atlanta, Georgia. However, Kim's life was cut short in 2018 when she died from a sudden case of pneumonia at the age of 47. Diddy was devastated. I mean, the mother of his children, a very important person in his life, unexpectedly gone. He tweeted out countless reflections, saying things like,
For the last 3 days, I've been trying to wake up from this nightmare, but I haven't. I don't know what I'm going to do without you. I miss you so much.
And later,
we were more than best friends. We were more than soulmates. We were some other shit, and I still miss you so much.
The tributes to Kim, the toll it took on him, it was clear Diddy cared. At least that was until the conspiracies came out. You see, the circumstances surrounding Kim Porter's death were confusing, to put it lightly. Kim was only 47 years old, living in a beautiful upscale neighborhood of Los Angeles with access to healthcare, medication, and anything else she might need. How did she end up dying of pneumonia at home in under 4 days? How did she not get to the hospital first? It's a valid question to ask. Young, healthy, rich people don't randomly die out of nowhere with no warning. Allegedly, according to a number of rumors and tabloids over the years, Kim Porter's death may not have been as simple as the official explanation makes it seem. There are a couple of reasons why Diddy might want Kim out of sight and out of mind. Most convincingly of all, there's a rumor that she was writing a book revealing Diddy's true character and the abusive nature of their longtime relationship in the year leading up to her death. Knowing what we know now about how Diddy treats women, it's not unbelievable that his relationship with Kim Porter was similar to the one with Cassie later on. There are still even deeper theories that many people online have used to point out a possibly even more sinister story behind the curtain. Kim Porter's autopsy was left inconclusive for over 2 months, not confirming pneumonia until some time later when a new coroner was assigned to the case. There's also a discussion around how pneumonia, the sickness that killed her, can infamously be induced with ricin, a chemical poison that can be extracted from castor beans. None of this is fully confirmed on the record, but there's still a lot of noise around Kim Porter's death because it's understandably difficult to identify what parts of Diddy's possible involvement might hold water or be completely false. Trying to learn more about her relationship with Diddy is only made more difficult since the publishing of a completely false fan fiction memoir of Kim Porter that shot to bestseller status on Amazon in just a few days. It was almost immediately removed from the site though when it was discovered that this book was totally fictitious. Containing a number of ridiculous claims, it took a lot of the rumors about Diddy to an extreme level that seemed much more like fan fiction than actual reporting. Even more, the author Chris Todd had used an African-American pen name, Jamal Millwood, despite looking like this. All that is to say, the life and death of Kim Porter remains shrouded in mystery and speculation. While official reports attribute her untimely passing to pneumonia, the circumstances surrounding her death have fueled countless conspiracy theories. The rumors of a tell-all book being near completion just before she died, the unusual autopsy timeline, the unfortunate death of her coroner just a few weeks after the investigations against Diddy began. These whispers of foul play have cast a long shadow over Diddy's relationship with Kim. Whether these theories hold any truth, or they might just be online conspiracies, I can't tell you that. But the tragic loss of Kim Porter at the age of only 47, regardless of its cause, is just another strange chapter in Diddy's life that only goes to further support the charges against him. Still though, somehow, Diddy's relationship with Kim is just the tip of the iceberg. Jennifer Lopez is another person Diddy was romantically linked to for some time, and she is still around to tell the story today. Not that she seems very much like she wants to at all. Ever since the accusations against Diddy came out, reporters, paparazzi, and the general public have been taking a close look at her to see what her response might be, especially since she was notably present on the night of the shooting that ruined bad boy artist Shine's life, landing him in prison for 10 years for a crime that multiple witnesses and experts said he didn't commit, while Diddy testified against him regardless. At one recent event, she abruptly left an autograph signing after being asked about the nature of her relationship with Diddy. Understandably, being asked to recall your relationship with an accused sexual predator isn't a pleasant situation to be forced into. She's previously described their time together as tempestuous and emotionally exhausting, with multiple sources citing that Diddy's cheating ended their relationship prematurely. However, her ex-husband has also claimed that she attended several controversial parties with Diddy while they were dating. Multiple times in recent months, Jennifer Lopez has done her absolute best to ignore and escape questioning about her connection to Diddy. But if you run away at the mention of his name, it sounds more and more like there's something you actively want to hide. But there was one woman brave enough to share exactly what she knew about Diddy. Suddenly, in November of 2023, Diddy's ex-girlfriend Cassie Ventura, an accomplished model and singer with multiple Billboard hits, filed a 35-page lawsuit against him with a list of horrifying accusations, confirming almost everything people had ever said about Diddy and more at the same time. The lawsuit started with an almost morbidly funny preliminary statement that goes like this. In 2022, Mr. Combs received the Lifetime Achievement Award at the BET Awards. During his acceptance speech, Mr. Combs stated, "I have to give a special shout out, thank you, to the people who were really there for me." He named a number of people before adding, "and also Cassie, for holding me down in the dark times." The truth, however, is that Cassie, Miss Cassandra Ventura, was instead held down by Mr. Combs. But then it gets serious. The contents of this lawsuit is disturbing, and the wording may be altered to avoid restrictions on the video. I'm not going to read it all, but it's important to hear some of it. Miss Ventura endured over a decade of Diddy's violent behavior and disturbed demands. For Miss Ventura, the dark times were those she spent trapped by Mr. Combs in a cycle of abuse, violence, and trafficking. Among other violent and unlawful acts, Mr. Combs assaulted Miss Ventura in her own home after she tried to leave him, often physically attacked her, resulting in bruises, bleeding, and more, blew up a man's car after he learned that he was romantically interested in Miss Ventura, forced Miss Ventura to engage with male sex workers while filming events, demanded that Miss Ventura carry a firearm in her purse just to make her uncomfortable, and introduced Miss Ventura to a lifestyle of excessive alcohol and substance abuse. Being over 35 pages long, the lawsuit is too much to read here, but there's some really disturbing stuff that sounds almost unbelievable to any reasonable person. In the process of describing how Diddy spent years gradually assuming complete control of Cassie's life and finances, there's a section about halfway through titled, "Mr. Combs Forces Miss Ventura into Sex Trafficking." Before I get started though, again, this stuff is terrible. It's not for sensitive ears. This section, while far too disturbing to be allowed in a YouTube video without them restricting it, details a pattern of alleged sexual abuse, coercion, and exploitation that Ventura claims she endured during her long relationship with Diddy. It depicts these events in graphic detail. Combs allegedly forced Ventura into sexual encounters with male sex workers, which he called freak-offs. These encounters reportedly involved drug use, took place in various hotels around the world, and occurred frequently. Ventura claims she was required to facilitate these encounters, including finding sex workers and performing with them. These encounters reportedly caused severe anxiety and physical illness for Ventura, as well as giving her severe reactions to the numerous drugs she was forced to intake. The lawsuit also mentions an incident where Combs allegedly dangled Ventura's friend over a hotel balcony. When this lawsuit was filed, it was like a bomb went off. Diddy has already been seen for years as a weird, strange figure in the music industry. But after this, he immediately went from being a creepy uncle to a straight-up monster doing the unthinkable. He couldn't lie or hide. And the rest of the lawsuit just gets worse and worse. The descriptions of what Diddy put Cassie through are graphic and disturbing, and I can't say them out loud on YouTube, let alone the fact that it feels disgusting to read the whole thing for yourself. It's 35 pages of terror. Diddy paid a $30 million settlement just one day after the lawsuit was filed. He put out a smug and repulsive statement saying that, "We have decided to resolve the matter amicably, wishing Cassie and her family all the best." Cassie got what she deserved, closure in the form of a ridiculous amount of money. But it didn't matter. The floodgates were open now, because Diddy's behavior quite clearly wasn't isolated. It most likely wasn't just one person. It seemed in all likelihood to be something he built his whole life around, a pathological obsession that he would go to any length to carry out. It had ruined Cassie's life, and it was about to be revealed in full. Over the next few months, many more lawsuits would be filed against Diddy. All of them accused Diddy of systematically having a lifestyle centered around doing horrible things to other people. One of the most disturbing lawsuits came from Rodney Lil Rod Jones, a Grammy-nominated producer who worked closely with Diddy for 14 months, producing 9 songs for his album Off the Grid. In a lawsuit he filed in February of 2024, he claimed to have evidence of the following: Meek Mill on Diddy's yacht consorting with underage individuals, Diddy giving laced drinks to underage individuals at his home, and Usher in Diddy's home consorting with underage individuals. There was also a long list of things Diddy did to abuse Rodney, throughout a long process of trying to convince him that he would make sure he would win Producer of the Year at the Grammys if he agreed to engage in homosexuality with him. In the lawsuit, it's written like this.
Throughout his time living with Mr. Combs, Mr. Jones was the victim of constant unsolicited, unauthorized groping and touching of his body parts by Mr. Combs. These events took place in Los Angeles, New York, Florida, and the US Virgin Islands. In addition to the unsolicited and unauthorized touching, Mr. Jones was forced by Mr. Combs to work in Mr. Combs' bathroom as Mr. Combs walked around naked and showered in a clear glass enclosure. As a heterosexual Christian man, Mr. Jones was uncomfortable with Mr. Combs' advances and expressed his discomfort to Mr. Combs' chief of staff, who responded with, "You know, Sean will be Sean." The chief of staff also attempted to downplay Mr. Combs' groping of Mr. Jones as friendly horseplay, stating that those acts were his way of showing that he likes you.
There was a lot more. The lawsuit is 73 pages long. It even includes photographic evidence of Cuba Gooding Jr. forcing himself on Rodney Jones, something that he has a long and public history of doing. The suit also includes graphic details about Christina Coram, Diddy's long-running chief of staff, describing her as equivalent to Ghislaine Maxwell, Jeffrey Epstein's former assistant who was convicted of sex trafficking and is now serving 20 years in prison. The lawsuit says this about Christina Coram.
It was important to defendant Coram to have Mr. Combs' drug of choice immediately ready whenever he asks for it. Defendant Coram required all employees from the butler to the chef to the housekeepers to walk around with a pouch filled with cocaine, GHB, ecstasy, marijuana, and Tusi. Defendant Coram also ordered sex workers and prostitutes for Mr. Combs. She ordered and distributed ecstasy, cocaine, GHB, mushrooms, and more to Mr. Combs and his guests who were present on his rented yacht and in his homes in LA, New York City, and Miami. On multiple occasions, she forced Mr. Jones to carry Mr. Combs' drug pouch against his will.
Talking in an interview 6 months after the lawsuit was filed, Rodney Jones revealed that he was living in hiding, unable to find work in the music industry and afraid for his life. He said this, "He's a monster. He'll do whatever is necessary to get exactly what he wants. He doesn't take no for an answer." Diddy's lawyers immediately filed to dismiss the lawsuit from Rodney Jones, calling it a cash grab, but it was far too late. The court of public opinion had already decided that everything in it was believable enough to take it and run. Even with relatively minimal evidence, at least from an outside standpoint, people made up their minds that Diddy was indeed a monster. Months before the feds ever came to pick him up, his career was already over. You go to old Facebook posts about Christina Coram, not even a public figure before she got named, and hundreds of people are leaving comments calling for her to go to jail, calling her evil and disgusting. Diddy's own Ghislaine Maxwell. And again, this is before Diddy got arrested. Not long after Lil Rod, Dawn Richard filed her own lawsuit. As a member of the girl group Danity Kane, the first girl group in history to have their first 2 albums debut at #1, and a former client of Diddy's Bad Boy Records, she knew Diddy very well. She wrote a number of things about her business and personal relationship with Diddy, starting with an affirmation that she herself witnessed Diddy's abuse against Cassie on many occasions. Dawn herself, though, was also a victim of Diddy's abuse. All the way back when she met him in 2004 while competing on his MTV show Making the Band, she wrote that Diddy often forced her and her bandmates to rehearse for up to 48 hours straight without food or breaks, with him instilling a culture of fear in all of the women he worked with. She also wrote that as she continued to work with him after her band broke up, he would often force her to take meetings with him while he was in his underwear or grope her body parts during stylist fittings before concerts and videos. She also wrote about a specific instance in 2010 when he tried to punch her in the face after she asked him to stop verbally abusing her in professional environments. Some of the most disturbing lawsuits filed against Diddy, though, have a different set of victims of a very specific age group. There are also other lawsuits that contain a number of claims so horrible I can't read the details on YouTube without this video getting restricted or even taken down. But it does beg the question of whether or not some of these allegations are even real, or if people are just chasing a payout like Cassie Ventura deservedly received. Fraudulent lawsuits are common in Hollywood, but before you make up your mind, I recommend looking into Tony Busby, the lawyer who's representing most of Diddy's alleged victims, having already filed dozens of lawsuits against Diddy, claiming he will be filing at least 100 more. Some of the unnamed yet alleged accusers claim to have been under 18 at the time of their interactions with Diddy, with some as young as 10. And Tony Busby himself is a high-profile lawyer with a pretty bad reputation in his hometown of Houston, Texas, notably having previously served as a defense lawyer on the impeachment trial of a Texas politician who had previously been fined by the SEC for securities fraud and accused of political bribery and corruption. However, Tony Busby also prosecuted NFL player Deshaun Watson in a case that resulted in the settling of over 20 claims of sexual misconduct. It's difficult to make a call on whether or not Tony Busby seems like the type of lawyer to file any old claim in the hopes of making a quick buck. Over 120 lawsuits is a shocking amount, but no amount of evil is unbelievable when it comes to what we already know has been confirmed with pictures and video proof of Diddy's actions. Regardless though, it doesn't matter. No one watching this video has access to Diddy's personal messages, his archives, his texts, or any other inside information that could reveal the truth once and for all. But there is someone who does: the Department of Homeland Security. There were dozens of other lawsuits against Diddy that came out across 2024, and there are still more coming out regularly. The most important one of all, though, was the one that was titled The United States of America versus Sean Combs. The feds don't arrest you immediately. It took about 10 months from Cassie's lawsuit against Diddy until the day when they put him in cuffs in the lobby of a New York City hotel. The reason for this delay was simple: the feds never lose. On the website of the Pew Research Center, you can find statistics about federal criminal conviction rates. In 2022, fewer than 1% of federal criminal defendants were acquitted. That's only 290 people out of 71,000 being let off the hook. But an even more surprising number is that only 1.9% of cases in total went to trial at all. That's because the overwhelmingly common result of being indicted by the feds in 90% of cases is that you plead guilty. The feds are so thorough, so on top of their business, that almost no one ever gets let off. The reason why is because they only charge winning cases. Some of the more high-profile federal cases in history have been people like Charles Manson, the conviction of the Unabomber, people like El Chapo, or a long list of international terrorists. The United States government is not going to come after you unless they are very sure you did it. That's why 90% of people who get charged by them just plead guilty to avoid possibly even greater charges and punishment if they take it to trial. The federal government would not risk the hit to their reputation by even allowing the chance of falsely charging a high-profile celebrity. There is no way. It has not happened in the past. And the feds? They took their time with Diddy, because Diddy was still walking around as a free man for months after these lawsuits were coming out. It took over 10 months from the day Cassie filed her lawsuit and cratered Diddy's reputation forever, immediately causing the severance of his sponsor deals and the cancellation of any public appearances, to the day that he got arrested. Even though he was cooked immediately, at least in the public eye, he was still a free man. But real consequences weren't far behind. Because shortly after Cassie's lawsuit was fired, it seems like the federal government, specifically the Department of Homeland Security, an agency normally known for preventing terrorism and securing the national borders, started taking a pretty close look at Diddy. Just 4 months after Cassie's lawsuit and 1 month after Rodney Jones' lawsuit, the DHS showed up at Diddy's house to take a look around. In March, they raided his homes in Miami and LA, seizing over 95 electronic devices and reportedly also finding illegal ghost guns and ammo in his house. That same day, Diddy was stopped at an airport just moments before he was going to board his personal jet on a flight to the Caribbean island of Antigua. Whether or not he was trying to flee the US is unconfirmed, but either way, he was not allowed on his own plane and remained in the US. He then spent another 6 months essentially in hiding, knowing the feds were watching him closely and building a case against him. And it wasn't until 7 months after Cassie's lawsuit, when CNN released a disturbing video clip proving her accusations once and for all, that Diddy finally broke his silence. And so with any denial going out the window, he dropped a half-assed, ridiculous apology for what he had done, or at least the part he was caught on camera doing, with no acknowledgement of anything else at all. One of Cassie Ventura's attorneys responded with this:
Mr. Combs' most recent statement is more about himself than the many people he has hurt. When Cassie and multiple other women came forward, he denied everything and suggested that his victims were looking for a payday. The fact that he was only compelled to apologize once his repeated denials were proven false shows his pathetic desperation, and no one will be swayed by his disingenuous words.
Regardless though, the feds eventually came and got him after a couple more months of investigation. It was then that the wildest lawsuit of all was filed: the United States of America versus Sean Combs. There are 3 federal charges against Diddy. Count 1 is racketeering conspiracy. Count 2 is sex trafficking by force, and count 3 is transportation to engage in prostitution. It's very revealing of Diddy's true character to see how he reacted to the accusations against him, even before the federal lawsuit came out, because the position that he and everyone around him would take from then on was denial. Diddy himself denied everything. He had his team denying everything. He was still making statements proclaiming his innocence, and up to the last minute, he was disparaging his victims. A massive misplay in light of everything that was coming out, especially knowing that the feds were looking at it. Most sane people, innocent or not, if they had things like this coming out about them, would go into hiding. That's what Harvey Weinstein did. Before he was arrested, he said nothing. He completely left the public eye. Diddy, though, his lack of self-awareness was on a whole other level. Just a few weeks after Cassie's lawsuit came out, one anonymous woman accused Diddy of sexually assaulting her at his recording studio in the early 2000s, with the papers being filed by the same lawyer who represented Cassie with her lawsuit, with that lawyer also having represented accusers against several other powerful figures like Bill O'Reilly and Harvey Weinstein in the past. The exact details of this anonymous lawsuit are a bit too much to read on YouTube, but notably it includes photographic proof of the accuser's visit to Diddy's studio, with even some photographs of her sitting on his lap. Diddy's response, though, was a massive mistake, and it calls back again to the overconfidence and narcissism we discussed earlier. He said this in a public statement. "For the last couple of weeks, I have sat silently and watched people try to assassinate my character, destroy my reputation and my legacy. Sickening allegations have been made against me by individuals looking for a quick payday." He also said, "Let me be absolutely clear. I did not do any of the awful things being alleged. I will fight for my name, my family, and for the truth." Knowing now that Diddy was being investigated by the federal government, and he was putting out statements of complete denial, trying to make other people look bad, knowing now that there was video proof about to be released of him abusing Cassie, the picture that this statement paints has guilty spelled out in red ink all over the paper. But there's one thing Diddy's team is right about: the fact that the case has become a media circus. That is, mostly on Diddy's side. With his kids and mother defending him despite the mountain of evidence, it's a terrible look. They're not alone though. Even Diddy's lawyer called the federal prosecutors racist and claimed that they were trying to bring down a successful black man with their charges, at the same time as he was making strange excuses for Diddy being in possession of massive amounts of baby oil, saying it was just how Diddy likes to shop at Costco, buying in bulk. It's almost like everyone involved on Diddy's side can't help themselves but to make outright ridiculous excuses that make no sense at all. I think it shouldn't be a surprise that Diddy's former legal team quit all the way back in June, realizing that the case mounting against them was a losing one that they wanted nothing to do with. And I think it should also be mentioned that Diddy's new lawyer was mentored earlier in his career by Harvey Weinstein's defense attorney. Not long ago, Diddy's lawyers filed a motion demanding that the names of his accusers be published to prevent fraudulent false accusations against him. And while maybe that makes sense hypothetically, in reality it turns out that there was a darker, evil side to that request as well. According to prosecutors from an article released just a day after he was arrested, he repeatedly contacted witnesses and victims in the months leading up to his arrest, even offering to pay a victim's rent if she would agree to publicly support him in return. Somehow, he still continued to be straight up evil even while facing jail for the rest of his life, his ego not letting him realize he should have gone into hiding and shut his mouth a long time ago. That particular victim had texted Diddy to tell him that Cassie's lawsuit was shockingly similar to her own experience with him, only to have him try to bribe her with money on a call that was recorded and is in the possession of prosecutors. From Rolling Stone, Combs' alleged witness tampering was a focal point of Southern District of New York prosecutors' argument that he should remain in federal custody as the high-profile case heads to trial. The former billionaire's long history of obstruction and violence demonstrates that the defendant simply cannot overcome the presumption that no condition or combination of conditions can ensure the safety of the community. His influence makes it difficult to ensure that witnesses can share their experiences and trust that the government can keep them safe, said attorney Emily Johnson, one of the prosecutors. In the months leading up to Combs' indictment, prosecutors claimed that Combs and his co-conspirators had constant contact with witnesses over several different methods, sometimes after the witnesses received subpoenas to testify in front of a grand jury. After the feds picked him up and brought him to jail in September, Diddy asked for bail 3 times, offering up a $50 million bond payment, yet he was denied each time by the judges on the case, with concerns of him being a flight risk and the past precedent of witness intimidation. He currently still sits in a cell at the Metropolitan Detention Center, a notoriously horrific facility. Other former inmates of note include R. Kelly, his cellmate Sam Bankman-Fried, and even Ghislaine Maxwell, a key figure in Jeffrey Epstein's criminal enterprise, among many others. And that's where Diddy's story basically ends. Once a billionaire businessman, an executive and producer known around the world, one of the biggest figures in Hollywood, running one of the biggest 90s and 2000s hip-hop labels ever, helping create some of the largest artists of the time, and being one of the most influential people in entertainment, he now faces 3 counts that, if convicted for all of them, will result in a sentence of at least 15 years, with the possibility for life in prison. And there are still more accusations and evidence coming out on a regular basis. What I'm trying to say here is that Diddy's cards are on the table. The feds know what he did. They know what he's in for. I've said it once and I'll say it again. 90% of people who get indicted on federal charges just plead guilty immediately to avoid even worse punishment that might happen at a trial. Diddy making all these statements about his innocence, pleading not guilty, his family sticking by him, it means nothing when we've seen a pile of evidence from videos to texts to Diddy's own personal history of being involved with scamming artists out of their royalties, possibly being linked to people's mysterious deaths, and having inappropriate relationships with underage boys. Denying anything that Homeland Security accuses you of doing when the entire world has seen the evidence against you is only further proof that while Diddy might have been a savvy businessman or a clever entertainer, he's ultimately stupid. But that's just Diddy's story. And it might be a dramatic story for sure. Diddy goes from being a kid in Harlem, growing up without a dad, to a key player in the 90s hip-hop and R&B scenes, to a household name with more endorsements, connections, and money than one person could ever know what to do with, to even becoming the third figure in hip-hop history to ever be a billionaire. For many people, Diddy was known as a guy who opened schools, founded charities, and represented success against all odds. He went to great lengths to give himself this good image, an inspiring image for the black community. But even that was a facade, as all he ever did behind closed doors was exploit and abuse other black people. Ultimately, his persona was a mask so full of holes that it's difficult to believe a human could even do what he did. Looking deep into the allegations against him, looking at his history, even looking at his music career where he did nothing but exploit others as much as he possibly could for over 30 years, the life and actions of Diddy alone are enough to make a horror movie out of. But still, somehow, the mystery isn't over. Even though he's behind bars, the book isn't closed yet, because the big hole in the plot is Diddy's network. It's very telling that when the law started to shine their light on Diddy, the silence that followed was deafening. The lack of response from his peers, his friends, it says 1,000 words. Because the one thing Diddy always was popular. He was friends with Oprah and Ellen. He was always on the late night shows. He was referenced in pop songs. He was in many photos with different politicians over the years, not to mention his longtime friendships with people like LeBron, Jay-Z, and countless other A-listers. When Diddy gets arrested and a life of abuse and crime is revealed, it throws every public relationship he ever had into question. And with no one coming to his defense, and dozens if not hundreds of other figures who have been known to associate with him going totally silent, it seems to point to something much, much bigger than one guy acting alone. And when you combine that long list of friends with the ever-increasing disturbing level of stories that just keep coming out about what happened behind the scenes at Diddy's parties, the implication gets pretty serious. It's very difficult to separate fact from fiction when it comes to the history of Diddy and his personal connections. Just because someone appears in a photo or a video at Diddy's house doesn't mean they can be implicated in a sex trafficking scandal. At the same time, though, there are a number of people who stick out above the hundreds of artists, politicians, actors, and socialites who have associated with Diddy over the years, to the point where most people seem to agree it doesn't make sense for them to not have known what was going on behind closed doors. Looking back at the beginning of Diddy's career, there's one name that comes up more than any others: Clive Davis. Clive Davis is a massively influential record producer and music executive from New York that has won 5 Grammy Awards and helped build the careers of many artists, including Whitney Houston, Aretha Franklin, Dionne Warwick, Sly and the Family Stone, Bruce Springsteen, Billy Joel, Pink Floyd, and countless others. Essentially, he did what Diddy did for the music industry, but in the 70s and the 80s. Despite having a huge influence on the sound of modern music, though, Clive Davis's own story is stained by a long history of corruption and abuse. The start of his career was marked by him getting fired when he used company funds to pay for his son's bar mitzvah. And although most discussions of his behavior behind the scenes are scrubbed from the internet, there are rumors about his personality that persist to this day. Specifically, the questionable circumstances that led to the founding of Diddy's Bad Boy Records, the home of Biggie Smalls, Maze, and more. You see, when Diddy got fired from his first music industry job after just a couple years of experience, it was Clive Davis that funded the beginning of Diddy's next project, giving Diddy a $50 million advance to get started on Bad Boy Records. That in itself wasn't a reason to be suspicious, but rumors have gone around for many years that Clive Davis was originally willing to give Diddy opportunities on the condition that they would have an intimate relationship similarly to what Diddy may have had with his artists, perpetuating the same type of behavior that Diddy himself would go on to use as a means of controlling others in the industry. Nothing has ever been confirmed, but Clive Davis's own character, including his appearance at a party while his artist Whitney Houston had just been discovered passed away in the same building, only asks more questions than it answers, painting a picture of a complex web of evil that goes much deeper than just Diddy himself. There are many other names that Diddy's been associated with when it comes to abusive artists like L.A. Reid or Andre Harrell, some of his early industry mentors, but it's probably hard to prove, and I doubt more information is coming out anytime soon, with many of these figures being elderly or passed away long ago. All of that is to say, Diddy certainly wasn't the first or the last person to exploit artists in one way or another. But of course, it doesn't stop there. The point of looking at Diddy's connections is to identify that while not everyone Diddy knows was necessarily engaging in the terrible things he was doing, it's difficult to imagine that these people don't know what Diddy was up to. And it seems far more likely that they were just conveniently looking the other way, at the very least. Although, many of the people around Diddy look at least a little suspicious of taking part in his evil ways. Meek Mill started vehemently denying that he had anything to do with Diddy at all after countless video clips of him and Diddy's strangely intimate interactions were publicized, painting a picture of a close relationship behind the scenes. Similarly, the Kardashian family were once close friends and supporters of Diddy, with a then 20-year-old Justin Bieber, where many of the attendees were completely naked. And that's just one example of the Kardashian family talking about Diddy the same way you would talk about having a favorite coworker.
So who was with you this weekend?
A bunch of my friends.
Diddy, Quincy, Justin Bieber,
So far,
French
so good.
Montana.
Well, this party, I think half the people there were butt naked.
Another strange connection is Diddy's relationship with Oprah Winfrey, the billionaire TV host known for her inspiring success story and empathetic personality. She not only attended many of Diddy's infamous parties, but was also known for a close relationship with Harvey Weinstein. There's an absurdity to the self-congratulatory short films where Diddy is standing with Jay-Z in the mirror talking about black excellence while they drink champagne, and meanwhile, Diddy is running a sex trafficking empire behind the scenes, and somehow no one has any idea he's a monster? With Diddy abusing so many people for so long, it's all but certain that there are many, many people in powerful places who knew exactly what he was really about and just said nothing. Right now, though, we don't know exactly who knows what or to what degree anyone was involved, at least not for sure, but the photographic evidence is damning, to say the least. With Diddy's trial beginning in May, it's almost certain that a lot more will be revealed over time, because Diddy wasn't a shadowy character that stayed out of the spotlight as much as possible. He was in the spotlight for so long that there were almost less people who didn't associate with him than there were people who stood by his side. But Diddy, who once stood at the top of the mountain, the king of the entertainment industry, controlling and influencing so many people with his face and brands all over the world, is now alone. Not just alone in his cell, but also alone in Hollywood. He's been abandoned by his former friends, with all of them scattering as quietly as they can to get away from his name. The list of celebrities coming out in support of Diddy is literally empty. It's 0 people. Not one person who he was previously seen with countless times has said a single word to defend him. Because the fact is that a lot of the entertainment industry, these people's careers are make or break based on public opinion. All of these people, if not perceived as relatable or people you could aspire to be, they stand to lose a lot of money. With their careers being based entirely on how much attention they get, there's a lot of incentive for them to look good. But is there any incentive for them to be good? Not really. It makes sense that a lot of the people who could have spoken out about Diddy wouldn't, at least from their perspective. Why would you risk your own connections, reputation, and income to speak out against someone around you who had immense power and connections and was willing to threaten people who he didn't like? Why would Oprah ever risk her multi-billion-dollar empire and her reputation as a generous, empathetic person for any reason? The same goes for Ellen, or Kim Kardashian, or LeBron, or Leonardo DiCaprio. You don't get to be where these people are without worshiping money. And when you worship money, there's nothing you'll put before it, not even speaking out against injustice and evil. In some ways, that makes it easier for a celebrity to get away with something horrible than for a random regular person. When everyone around you has a brand to protect and so much at stake, they'll never speak out against the person next to them and risk even the tiniest stain on their manufactured persona of perfection. It's totally possible that the list of people who took part in Diddy's abuse could be smaller than you think, but the list of people who knew about it and were perfectly okay to do nothing is probably a mile long. But in that way, does the difference between those two things even matter? Even more than just turning a blind eye, though, there are a lot of real reasons why crimes like Diddy's wouldn't get exposed, even if many people knew about it. Diddy is known to have threatened people with firearms, stalked people he didn't like as a form of intimidation, and even blew up Kid Cudi's Porsche when he got involved with Cassie during a break in the relationship. He went to great lengths to maintain a dangerous image to the people around him and was even found to have ghost guns in his house, firearms with serial numbers scratched off that can be more easily used to commit crimes. Basically, many people around Diddy knew that he was willing to do whatever it would take to maintain control. He had no issue threatening or intimidating others, even as we've heard from far back in his music career in the early 90s. Still though, the silence from Diddy's friends is pretty deafening. It's hard not to start to make assumptions, because if you're associated with someone and they turn out to be a monster and you never knew about it, you would probably tell everybody that you had no idea what was going on. That's exactly the first thing anyone would say about a friend or a coworker or an acquaintance who turns out to be a terrible person. I had no idea. And Diddy had a lot of friends, but suddenly they're all silent. There's this kind of well-known theory in the aliens community called the dark forest hypothesis. In the dark forest hypothesis, it says that we aren't alone in the universe, but that there are many alien civilizations around us everywhere. It's just that they stay completely silent because they're advanced enough to realize there are many other civilizations who could destroy them instantly. This is obviously hypothetical, but I think it applies to the world of celebrity that Diddy thrived in. If he was the only one involved in the racketeering, the abuse, the trafficking, he would have people selling him up the river immediately. Celebrities love attention. It's their currency. The only reason why that wouldn't be happening is if someone, or maybe everyone, was afraid of what could be said about them if they opened their mouths. Looking at it that way, it makes a lot of sense that almost none of Diddy's peers have said anything about him at all. Tabloids are all over Diddy right now. You never know how real a source might be when it comes to random blogs or magazines, but when it comes to their commentary today, it kind of makes sense. One website wrote this: Diddy is still in total denial, and he actually expected all of his high-profile friends to stand up for him, especially his exes like Cameron Diaz and J-Lo. The source continued, he can't wrap his head around the fact that everyone's dropped him. They said there's a legitimate fear among a huge swath of people in Hollywood that he could seriously embarrass them if he decided to talk about what they shared with him back in the day. There are rumors that he's kept meticulous records and even video recordings of all the crazy stuff that went on his parties over the years, and it's only adding to everyone's panic. The word is, he's got enough dirt to hang half of Hollywood. Of course, these sources could be totally made up, but if it weren't, wouldn't these celebrities, always so quick to speak out and get some attention, always wanting to make themselves look like heroes or get their name in the news, these people who thrive off of engagement, why are they quiet now? Why would they pass up an opportunity to make themselves look good or to speak out on an important topic? The only logical answer is because what it reflects back on them is either too difficult to talk about, maybe in the case of Justin Bieber or Usher, or because it says something about them as people too. Earlier in the video, I mentioned Diddy's ambition. I think it's clear for a lot of people who reach the point he did, that can be a double-edged sword. With ambition, you can go far. From the bottom of the ladder, growing up without two parents, in poverty, no opportunities around you, then becoming a billionaire, there's so much that could be done with that power and influence. The unfortunate truth is though, for most people, not just Diddy, the kind of person who gets to that point of wealth, they don't have anything in their heart that stops them from going too far. Hypothetically, a fast car is useful. If you want to get home to visit a sick family member, going home faster allows you to get home sooner. But if you go too fast and don't pay attention, you might just end up running over 3 old ladies along the way. And so looking at it like that, Diddy's so-called ambition, his empire, it ultimately just became a cover-up for his narcissistic, abusive, psychopathic personality. He wants to be the best, he wants to be a billionaire, he wants to have whatever he wants. But what did he do with all of that energy? He did nothing but build a facade to cover up his pathological need to take advantage of people. I'll quote Cassie's lawyer's response to his apology video. They said, Combs' most recent statement is more about himself than the people he hurt. The fact that he was only compelled to apologize once his repeated denials were proven false shows his pathetic desperation, and no one will be swayed by his disingenuous words. And that's just Diddy. Looking at the countless people around him who seemed like they were oblivious to his actions at the time, you're left with a chilling realization. There's almost no way Diddy was completely alone. From the Kardashians to Oprah, from Beyonce and Jay-Z to Meek Mill and Ellen DeGeneres, it's not just about one man's crimes. It's about an entire system that values image and wealth over morality and justice. And as we wait for Diddy's trial in May, you're left wondering, how deep does this rabbit hole go, and who else might be implicated in the web of secrets and lies? The fall of Diddy might just be the first domino in a much larger, more sinister picture, one that could shake the very foundations of Hollywood and the music industry as you know it. You can look back through thousands of photos and videos portraying Diddy as a fun guy, party guy, an entertainer, and knowing what he was really doing to people behind the scenes, it casts a massive shadow over the entirety of Hollywood that he was allowed to do that by his peers in the first place. Diddy obviously isn't the only person like this though. Bill Cosby, Jeffrey Epstein, Harvey Weinstein, so many others. It's only becoming more and more obvious that influence and power attracts a very specific type of person. In a world where public opinion decides who thrives and who gets forgotten, though, the amount of control Diddy had over the people around him more than likely led to a sort of standoff, where many, if not most people who knew exactly what his true character was, would rather have protected themselves than stand up. Not only is that in itself a horrible injustice, but it begs the question, what else is being kept under wraps? A lot of the contents in this video comes down to conjecture or clues, but with Diddy in prison until his trial in May, it seems like his prosecutors might know exactly what they're looking for. As of right now, though, it's hard to say that the underbelly of the entertainment industry isn't looking more sinister and evil than anyone ever thought was possible before.